So in 1492, after Columbus had landed in Santo Domingo, he makes his way back to Europe, and almost immediately you have conflict break out between these different European powers in an effort to build empires. And this starts a period of imperialism that's going to have major impacts not just on European history but on the world. So Columbus, on his way back from Santo Domingo, decides to stop in Portugal and pay a visit to King João of Portugal. Remember, this is the king that had turned Columbus down on his offer for exploration. And Columbus tells João that he discovered a route across the Atlantic to the Indies, to the islands in East Asia. And this really upsets the king because he had made a treaty earlier under the direction of the Pope that all newly discovered lands in Asia would be Portuguese. Now, neither of them knew this was not Asia. So it really upset the king, and he wrote a very angry letter to the king and queen of Spain, demanding that they cede this territory to him. Spain feels like they had already made this deal with Columbus to claim this new land, and you have sort of this international incident breakout between Spain and Portugal. So to prevent war, they go to the Pope, and the Pope says, okay, give me a map and give me a pencil. And he draws a line and says, okay, everything on this side of the line, which is not yet Christian, will be Spanish. And everything on this side of the line that is not yet Christian will be Portuguese. And this satisfies both parties until a couple years later, the Portuguese realize the line gave them almost no territory in the New World, which they discovered that this is in fact a New World. And so they redraw the line in 1494 at the Treaty of Tordesillas. And this sort of solidifies Spanish and Portuguese claims over the New World. Now the thing about it is it wasn't that strictly enforced. Brazil, for example, which was a Portuguese colony, cuts well into South America beyond the line. But it was really important in spurring further expansion. This deal is fine if you're Portugal or Spain, but what if you're another country like France? You say, hey, I'm a Catholic country, I'm interested in expansion, why don't I get a cut of this? Or what if you're England or the Netherlands, who were Protestant, didn't care what the Pope says? So this treaty wasn't widely enforced or respected, but it did spur other explorers and other nations to send explorers to build colonies, not only in the Americas, in the New World, but also in Asia, which remember was the original objective of the explorers. Here's a map of colonial empires in the 17th century. And that's a little later than the 15th century, but it gives you an idea of where these colonial powers are going to focus their efforts. So Portugal, who remember early on led exploration, they will continue to hang on to those port cities that they seized in India, as well as the land they found in Africa. And later the territory in Brazil, which is granted them by the Treaty of Tordesillas. Spain will focus its efforts in mostly the New World, as we'll see next unit, but also after Magellan landed in the Philippines, named after King Philip of Spain, they claim territory over here as well. The Dutch over here have been pretty small, but they're a wealthy country, and they were really interested in controlling the spice trade. So they'll move their exploration and colonization efforts to other parts of India, because remember, India wasn't really unified, as well as what was called the Spice Islands over here in Indonesia, and all the way up into Taiwan, as well as the South African coast here, and spots in the Americas. The English, meanwhile, got real dark, sorry. They will also go to India, trying to get control of the spice, but they'll also focus a lot of territory in North America. And then France, who we'll see next unit, started to consolidate their political power. They'll also focus on North America here, and parts of Africa. But mostly I want to focus on the strategies these countries will use. Portugal was really interested in controlling the trade routes to India and the Indian Ocean. So they had this system called the Cartise system. Basically, they made a law in their territory, and in fact the whole Indian Ocean, that said if you want to trade in these waters, you have to have an official license, a Cartise, from the Portuguese government. If you don't have one, we can seize all your stuff. And if you have one, you have to pay regularly to get this. Now, Indian Ocean trade was already pretty vibrant by the time that the Portuguese get there. So most people in the Indian Ocean saw the Portuguese as basically pirates, forcing people to buy these licenses to trade in waters that previously had been free to trade in. But it is an attempt by the Portuguese to make as much money as they can off this, off their control of those trade routes. In other parts of Europe, and specifically we're talking about France, the Netherlands, and England, you have the formation of what are called joint stock companies. Basically, in a joint stock company, investors pool their money together to make ventures and try and make money off of them. It's essentially early forms of the kind of stocks that you see today, where people invest money in a company. The two most important ones for this time period were the Dutch East India Company, or VOC as it's abbreviated in Dutch, and the British East India Company. Both these companies focus their efforts on, like the name says, East India. The British East India Company took control, well, they made deals with the princes in India, but eventually they were given by the crown basically free rein to make and break treaties with whoever they wanted to in India. So the British East India Company kind of becomes a state in its own right. The Dutch East India Company, meanwhile, focused on controlling other ports like the Portuguese did, and controlling territory in Indonesia. And there they force a lot of the indigenous people to work to grow spices and other cash crops for them. We'll talk more about the systems that control North America next unit. But you can see pretty early on here the development of these powerful empires that are going to shape the world after this age of exploration.